Hey, how's it going? I literally walked out of one meeting and into this, so still getting my bearings. Um, it's good to be here. So this is the first time they've run this event, and so you guys signed up. Why? Why are you here? Anyone? Your friend asked you to go. That's not a bad reason. I've ended up in some interesting places just on that. Anybody else? What brought you to this event? Anybody says a church bus. Yeah? To learn more about leadership, yeah. And what have you guys been talking about so far? Let's recap. Who else have you heard and what stuck in no particular order? Personal leadership, okay. And so what grabbed you out of that? Nothing. Oh, great, excellent. Sorry, guys. No, give me one thing that stuck out to you that was significant talking about personal leadership. I'll come back to you. I will. Yeah. Intentional relationships. Sounds like Holly Cobb stuff, right? Yeah. And so what was one thing that, specifically out of... Yeah. Yeah. And that assumes that you're believing that you can actually hear that and that you are right, that you are discerning it correctly. Take action on it. We figured it out yet? All right, yeah. Open yourself. Let God see. Awesome. Let's give him a big hand. He worked hard for that. What else has really stuck out to you as you guys have been listening to some of the other sessions? How to lead leaders. So tell me a little bit about that. What really jumped out at you? Was that Pastor Mike? Whew. Yeah. With likability. Yes. The magic power of likability. No, that's excellent. Is that a strange concept for you? I mean, chronologically, you guys are young compared to me. Like when you think about that idea of leading leaders, do you go, well, someday I'll use that? Seriously, does that seem like, I'm not sure exactly when I'm going to get to plug that information in? Or do you understand, you do that whether you realize it or not? Does that connect with you? That we all lead in different areas. We all have influence. And so if we all have influence, then if we're ever interacting with one another, we're leading leaders. We're all called to lead, right? These are good things. Anything else that really has been solid gold for you so far? That's right. In fact, no learning happens without failure. Failure is an integral part of learning. You don't just start from zero and learn everything exactly right. Everything's on the job training, right? We're always living. We're always screwing it, right? And I'm glad that you can still, see God work in your life if you're a screw up, because that's my category. Well, this is excellent. Today we're going to actually talk about something interesting. When we were talking about some of the potential topics for this event and what we could really dig in with you guys, something really jumped out at me, and that was how to lead people that don't want to be led. Have you ever been in that situation? It's an important thing to really dig into, and it's a universal dynamic that you run into in any area of leadership, because the reality is, leadership wouldn't be necessary if we were going that direction ourselves, right? Conflict is an integral part of leadership. It doesn't mean combat, but conflict, right? Leadership requires you to move people in a direction they would not atrophy towards. They're not going to just drift towards what you're trying to lead them towards, or else they wouldn't need leading. It's kind of like if everybody's going someplace already, and it's awkward when someone goes, "Yeah, come on, follow me," and we're like, "I don't need to follow you. We're just getting in the car." If you're already going there, you don't require leadership. And so leadership has, as part of its definition, and woven into it this idea that there is a conflict between where people currently are in some given concept, or where they are geographically, emotionally, spiritually, financially, whatever you're moving in, and you're taking them from where they are to where they should be by some definition. And so there's a certain amount of truth to say every exercise of leadership, every relationship of leadership involves a certain degree of people not really wanting to follow. There's a resistance in us. And it's interesting because it really gets into how we're hardwired. As Christians, we can understand that we're, in our hardwiring, we have two drastically different things tugging on us, right? We've got our flesh, right? That at the essence, the fall is defined in, I will do what I want, right? And yet we have Christ in us, right? The new heart, the new flesh, the new spirit in us, which responds to the Father heart of God and who he has made us to be and his dreams and desires for us, right? And so these two things are 2 points that are held in tension in every single person, even people that aren't in a love relationship with Christ. I mean, people are created in that dynamic. They are in a sinful world, and God does have a plan and an agenda for them. And we see that active when we're trying to lead people. What I want to talk about is largely coming out of our experience with the Ugandan Water Project. I appreciate Joe's introduction. If you're interested in knowing a little bit more about what we do, I'll be talking out of some stories to illustrate things that we've experienced involving leading people that didn't necessarily want to be led. My business card is over there on this table, so you can get a hold of us that way. As well as if you want some information about the water project, you can check that out. So check those out on the table. We love interacting with people, and a lot of the work that we do gives you an opportunity to test drive some of these concepts you've been learning, because we do a lot of engagement with teams and things like that. So before we get into a couple stories, and I hope you're ready to interact, because it's a lot more fun when you guys ask questions or make comments. And if you do want to interrupt me, feel free just to either stand up, start screaming, wave your hand, or whatever. But there's a couple, things that I wanted to talk about before we look at a couple of illustrations. When we're talking about leadership, we're talking about positional leadership versus relational leadership a lot of times. And so, one of the things that you guys, whoever mentioned about leading leaders, that you have to have influence, it's not control, right? And so that's relational leadership. Positional leadership is all about, I'm the boss, me boss, you not, and there's a lot of command and control. Whereas relational leadership is about love and loyalty and that intrinsic, internal focus of control, right? And if you look at the ultimate model for leadership for us is Christ. He didn't exercise positional leadership when he was here on earth. He has positional leadership, right? He has, he's not up for election. He's not going to get fired. There's no one that's going to take his job. So positionally, he's set. He could function completely out of that. But did he? No. Everything he did was about setting that aside and focusing entirely on relational leadership. And that's a good model for us. How do you build that connection? How do you really focus on rapport and really aligning yourself with the people that you're trying to have influence on? And it's important to recognize the difference. Also, positional leadership is a very shallow and short-lived, has a very short half-life. Positional leadership, when you get released from it, you're like, whoo, that's done, right? Even if it's a positive, even if you didn't get abused, positional leadership doesn't have a lot of leverage in your life once it's expired. Think about, being in school. A teacher that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad teacher, but just someone that you didn't really connect with. They have positional, leadership in your life in the classroom, but there's teachers that, within 6 months of graduation, I couldn't even remember their name, and yet, I knew them for 4 years in high school or whatever, or 4 years in college, because they didn't have relational leadership in my life. And yet, there's other situations where someone is in relationship with us and has that role of influence, is a mentor, is someone that is really, has a lot of play in our lives, that even today, if I haven't seen them in years, some of these people, if they see something that they want to talk to me about, I give authority to that, and I take time to listen, right? That's that relational. It goes deep. It's very residual, right? It just keeps, it remains in our life. There's people that, I think about a teacher I had years ago. Her name is Rungenhild Schloss Ulrich. She's not from here. And Rungenhild, she's Norwegian and married a German. And that's Schloss with a K. And and this is a woman who, was part of my life when I was very, very young. And yet, because of the level of investment into my life, she can call me anytime, day or night, anywhere I am in the world, and I'm in some places that are really bizarre, and I will take her call, and I will give her all the time she wants, and I will listen to anything she says, and I will try to do anything she asks for help with, because the level of relational leadership in my life has been very high. I know this woman loves me. I know that she really sees me for who Christ made me to be, and not all the scabs and rough edges that I have, but she really, sees me as Christ sees me better than I see myself. And all of those things, and has sacrificed into my life, and all of those things have resulted in a very long residual influence in my life. Does that make sense? We have to recognize we're really focusing on relational leadership, especially when we're dealing with this issue of trying to lead people that don't want to be led. Now, it's also, we're not necessarily going to focus on like adamant, violent opposition to our leadership. We're not talking about a rebellion here. That's a whole different talk, how to put down a rebellion. We're really focusing on the whole spectrum of resistance that involves things like, some people are fearful of what you're trying to lead them into. Some people just don't, maybe it's just a general apathy. They don't necessarily care about what you're doing, or they're ignorant. They just don't know anything about it. All kinds of things to a little bit more involved resistance of, being critical or just having a different agenda and things like that. So we're really talking about more of these kinds of dynamics that are very, very common in all the different areas that we find ourselves in, whether it's involved in school or in classes or even within our personal friendships, whether it's part of youth group or even at work as you're getting into the various jobs and activities or on sports teams. These are very common dynamics. It's not actual people coming after you with a machete or a pitchfork, right? So we're not talking about that kind of violent opposition to you. Not your enemies per se, but just the everyday resistance we find. I would say that in order to really effectively lead when people don't want to be led, one of the most important things that I could impart to you is you have to align yourself with people and what God's doing in their life and who they are, and you have to somehow fall in line with how God sees them. Because the truth is, you can't lead what you don't love. Not really. If you don't love who you're trying to lead, then really all you're trying to do is manage or manipulate. And that's the truth. And we have that example, from countless examples in the Bible. If there is no love, there is no leadership. It's just manipulation or at best management. And so how do you fall in love with people in the sense of who you're leading? Well, first I would encourage and challenge you that it takes a lot of work. We have to become a student of people. And if you feel, if you're sitting here, either you really had nothing to do this weekend, or you have something in you that says, hey, I really do feel like I'm called to be in some role of influence in my life. Even if it's just among my peers, I recognize I have an opportunity, I have a role in that. And then some of you are beginning to catch a glimpse of yourself as having more potential to really serve in a defined role of leadership in different areas. But all of us have that, and if you're here, I suspect you're starting to realize it's so important to understand the people around you. And so what does that mean? I mean, it definitely means the specific people you're interacting with. Take the time to get to know them. Understand where they're coming from. Understand the culture of their life. Understand, their their family situation, what their interests are. I mean, it's like trivia, right? If you're going to play a Jeopardy category of the people that you're leading, you should be able to hit all through the different, money categories, right? You should be able to get the double Jeopardy, on those people. You should understand them, and it takes time. But also, if you zoom out, it's important to be a student of people in general. And this is huge. If you can spend some portion of your time Googling personality types and understanding the kinds of motivators for people, you will find that will help you connect with people in a way that you never thought possible. It will unlock things and help, it'll bring you a revelation that will reinterpret your past experience. Where you can look back and go, yeah, I remember I said this to this person and they got really, really angry with me. And I didn't necessarily understand why. But I would like to avoid that next time. Let me give you an example. For instance, and by personality types, I mean, if you start looking at things like DISC, personality types, or Myers-Briggs, if you're taking psychology in school or whatever, you start hearing about those terms. That helps to define certain personality types and their motivations and their fears and their strengths and their weaknesses and things. And that's not like just a bunch of head trippy stuff. Like that really, the rubber hits the road when you understand. Like for me, my personality type is I'm very, very task-oriented and very driven. And that's a great strength as long as people aren't getting in my way. There's some real weaknesses to it. And so that means that for me, it's good to understand yourself, but I'm actually challenging you to learn these things so that you can understand those you're interacting with. Because I know if I meet somebody that is like that, that their greatest fear is being taken advantage of. And so in my communication with them, in building relationship and connection to them, I have to really focus on building trust and transparency so they don't feel like I'm hiding anything and that they don't feel like they're being taken advantage of. It reminds me of our first illustration. I was thinking about some of these things, and a couple years ago, we in Uganda, one of the things that we do as an organization is we partner with Hope Street Uganda, which is a group of young guys that used to be street children and found Christ and decided to take a stand against street kids by working to rescue street boys that are living on the street. And these guys are amazing. And we've done a lot to just build relationship and help them. And one of the things we do a lot of is try to help them develop mentoring businesses. So businesses that, first of all, can help earn income for their program because they don't really have any external sponsorship hardly at all. And also businesses that can be an environment where these guys can teach skills to the boys. And it's quite a challenge to come up with these business models. And one of the things we had come up with was to do a barber shop. It's a very simple, easy skill to teach. And in Uganda, there's really only like 4 haircuts for guys. It's like all off or mostly off on the sides, or, like they keep it pretty simple because it's so hot. Everyone just wants their hair short. It's just different kinds of really, really short. And so, yeah, I mean, like if you got a pair of buzzers and a mirror and a chair, you're in business, right? And so we wanted to build them a shop. We were going to do this together. We do everything in cooperation together. And so we were going to weld this thing out of scrap metal. We're going to have a welder basically weld this shed, and then we're going to build the roof and outfit it with doors and stuff. And so in true African style, instead of going to where we wanted the building and building it there, we actually, the welder said, no, I'll just build the building here at my shop, and you can just carry it to where you want it. That's how they do things in Africa. And so, it was quite a feat just working with them to try and get all the pieces together and get it, designed and all this stuff. And there was a small team from our organization, and one of the guys on the team, he was a bit of a challenge that day. He always had one more suggestion, and the reality is, like, a day is only so long. We're only in country so long, and ultimately we've got a task that has to get done. Remember the part I said I'm very task-oriented and very driven, and, like, all his suggestions were starting to, I'm like, no! At some point we got to stop suggesting and just do, right? And so as we're over with the welder and trying to get the last bit finished up so we can carry this building down the road, he's again with more suggestions and wanted to change this and wanted to change that, and I made a horrible mistake, and I reprimanded him right there, and I'm like, listen, man, and I just took him to task, like, and I was hot, I was tired, we hadn't eaten, I was grumpy, all kinds of horrible excuses for mistreating somebody. But here's the thing that I realized later, because his response was he shut down completely. Like, he didn't, like, get up in my face. He didn't, he just shut down. And I was like, part of me was like, all right, now he's out of the way. Now we can get this finished. But once the smoke cleared and I realized, wow, what did I just do? I started to think about him and his personality and realize his personality is all about the connections to people. He loves networking. He loves, if you talk to him and you say, hey, tell me a little bit about yourself, he'll talk all about the people he's connected to. And it's not about name dropping. It's about valuing the connection. You ask me, I'll tell you all the stuff that we've accomplished as an organization and the mountains we've moved and and again, that's not about bragging. It's about, I put a lot of value in that productivity and, but he puts a lot of value in those connections. And his personality type, their greatest fear is losing face in the context of community. And in front of all the people that we're working with, all the guys and the rest of our team members, I ripped them up and down, right? And what happened? He just shut down. And I had to humble myself and go to this guy. But because, I thank God that I took some time to become a student of people. I still screw up. I'm not proud of that mistake. But I thank God that I had done some work to invest in an understanding that helped me have some kind of guide to go, Lord Jesus, give me some understanding of what I just broke. I know I broke something. And so I challenge you to take some time, study Myers-Briggs. You can take an online Myers-Briggs profile test in 10 minutes, and you'll be amazed what you learn about yourself. But then go further to read about other personality types and what their strengths are, what their fears are. Because as you're leading people, one of the best ways to lead people that don't want to be led is to overcome their objections and their resistance and avoid the minefields before you even start. If you understand who you're working with and you invest in that knowledge, it gets you so much further to leading people without hurting them and without them pushing back, without offending them in a way that you look at and go, wow, what just happened? Because the truth is, someone like me, if I'd gotten, if I was in his position and somebody took me to task on something, I'd be like, it's never comfortable to be corrected, but shake it off and look at it and go, yeah, he's right. I'm getting in the way. All right, back to the job. And that doesn't affect me the same way. So we have to understand, there's certain personalities that the high value for them is really nurturing people and making sure that there's consensus and making sure that you've really connected with everybody on the team. And it really is, that's super important. If they feel like you're not gathering consensus, they're going to resist you. And you need to be able to identify that. Another major profile really focuses on the detail and accuracy. And so if you come in and you say, all right, this is what we're going to do, and you've got a basic game plan in your mind, and you're suggesting something, but you don't have the details worked out, well, if you've got a detailed person on your team, well, it's going to be really critical that you recognize they're not on board unless you can take some time to slow down, let them ask questions, clarify certain things, and really get that, that person on board with specific details and plans to the extent you can. And if you don't, just recognize you're going to have some tension. And so all that is in this whole idea of become a studier of people and understand not just the individual people that you're connected with, but just how human beings work. You'll learn more about yourself, and if you can learn these kinds of things about people, you will definitely avoid some of the pitfalls and the minefields that you can sometimes encounter. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? You are going to ask me some questions, right? You promise? You did promise. So, you have to learn people. Second of all, like I said, you have to really love people. And that requires a certain vulnerability on our own part. And that's a risk. But if you're not willing to love the people that you're called to lead, you want to know a secret? God will resist you. Because people are important to him. And loving people is important to him. And if you don't love them, then you are not on the same page with him. And he is going to protect those people from you. until someone that is willing to love them will come along. Not to mess with you too much, but if there's not a lot of people that are called to lead the people you're called to lead, even if we're talking small situations, oftentimes God will resist if we're not willing to love and leave people unled rather than let them be damaged by us just trying to control people. And so I really encourage you to learn how to love people. And that gets messy. Because like I said, it starts with vulnerability in our own heart. That means we got to be willing to take the risk to be emotionally invested. Find out, where people are really at and how they feel about things and what they think about things, what's important to them. We have to ask the Lord to soften our own heart and show us where we have a hard time connecting at an emotional level. It's not a simple process. Sometimes it takes a lot of time. But here's the great thing. If you're willing to align your mind and study people and in general as well as the individuals that you're working with, and align your heart with God's heart for people and really love them and ask God to impart to you a certain measure of the love that he has for them, what he is willing to do then is extend a certain measure of authority relationally between you and them. And that's when the magic really starts to happen. But only when you're on the same page that he's on. We align ourselves with what he knows of those people and what he feels for those people, and then we can be trusted to be an influence in their lives. Think about your own experiences. We've seen people that have positional leadership, positional authority, but we don't see much happen around them. And quite often, you can easily identify a failure of them to either know who they're trying to work with, a failure of them loving who they're supposed to be working with, or both. And yet we've also oftentimes found people that would seem not super qualified to be leading. And yet they're bringing great results. And that's always humbling because you look at it and go, man, I kind of think I could do a better job. And yet these people are really making an impact in the lives around them. And sometimes it's not because they're the expert. It's not because they have a ton of experience, but it's because they've been willing to be focused on the people they're serving, and they're willing to really love them. And so God really brings a blessing and empowers them to have influence in lives. Does that make sense? I wanted to share a story that illustrates some of the challenges that you can encounter when working with people. One of the interesting relationships we got into is we do a lot with the Ugandan Water Project, where we are connecting with sponsoring groups here in the United States to raise money for water projects that we install in Uganda. And so we're having to, work with people that are new to us all the time. Sometimes they just find us on the internet. Sometimes they're referred to a friend. Sometimes, we're chasing them down and building that connection from our side. But we end up with, trying to build connections to people that we really have no history with. And then trying to get them to raise money, which is hard. and to do that and care about people that they've never met on the other side of the world. You can see there's some challenges there, right? And so this is a story I called the story of James and the Giant Church. There's this giant church down in Maryland. And, they've got like 6,000 people. I would consider that a giant church. And, they've got a lot of resources. And years and years ago, they were very involved in Uganda. And they drilled a bunch of wells, spent gobs of money doing it. And then over time, the people that were really championing that at their church kind of moved away. And the relationship really went cold. And most of the wells broke. And as some new people in the church decided to start reviving that, they reached out and found us through Google online and said, hey, we'd like to talk to you about what we've done in the past in Uganda and if there's any alternatives and what we could do and maybe you could help us. And so I ended up in this conversation with this guy named Bart. And Bart was a big business guy, and frankly, I found him a little intimidating because I had Googled him, and I was like, wow, this guy really has done some serious stuff in the business world, and I'm just a guy that works out of my garage in Lima, and talking to him, there was a weird dynamic, this tension, as I was trying to say, well, here's how we do things, and walking him through our solutions and the process and all this stuff, and he kept feeling, he kept saying, well, we want to make sure that we're involved in every single step of the process. We want to know about how the money gets transferred. We want to know where you buy all of the materials. We want to be part of, not actually even know where it is. We want to have somebody there next to your guy making the purchase and watching how that happens, and it'd be like someone saying, yeah, let's hang out, and what they mean is, I'm never going to get further than 2 feet from you. Like when you go to the bathroom, I'm going to go to the bathroom. When you brush your teeth, I'm going to be right there going, wow, you got to go in the back, up on the top, Like, that is what it started to feel like. And I'm like, this guy is all up in my grill about, like, every single detail, to the point where it, like, was a big problem because, like, part of how we do what we do is, like, when we go to buy stuff, we make sure there's no Mzungu around because they charge you more if you're, like, oh, this is for an NGO. This is going to cost more. And so, like, part of what works with our cross-cultural organization is this side of the equation staying out of the way of the other organization, of our office in Uganda. And now these people want to be right there, and I'm like, oh, we're going to lose our shirts on this project. And I'm trying to sort out why there's this tension. Does he not trust us? What is it? And I'm praying about it because I'm like, obviously this is a big church. They seem to be passionate about this work. We want to start this relationship out well. And I want some breakthrough in this tension, in this relationship. But it feels a little bit like we're trying to, in a good way, provide some leadership. We're a water project. We do this again and again and again and again. It's what we do. We're working in 170 communities right now. That's a lot of work. We know what we're doing. And he's like borderline paranoid about, what are you worried we're going to steal from you, And so I was like, Lord, help me understand how to get some breakthrough in this relationship so that we can have the ability to serve these people well. I don't want it to always be this tension. And I was grateful because the Lord really showed me a couple things. One, that this church was used to having to carry all the weight of stuff because they're huge. And so everybody's used to them having all the resources. And I thought back to one of the great principles on leadership in the Bible that we've used again and again. In Proverbs it says, a gift opens the door for the giver. And if leadership is about conflict, then oftentimes if you can get an open door, that's a good thing. So if you can find a way to open a relationship that you suspect might have some conflict in it, if you can start that with giving into that relationship, a door will open. And so I'm like, Lord, show us how we can give into this relationship. And the other thing I said was, Lord, help me to understand, what is he worried about? What is the tension here? Does he not trust us? If he doesn't trust us, he should just work with somebody else. I can get that. It's a lot of money involved. Tens of thousands of dollars. And in the end, I approached this guy, Bart, and I said, hey, we were thinking about something. They were going to do one test project with us and see if he liked the way it worked. And if it did, they were going to put a whole ton of money through us. I said, you're going to do this one test project. We'd like to match that out of our own budget. He was floored. He was like, what? And again, like, this church is huge compared to our little organization. And he was just so taken aback that we would be willing, to whatever you guys put in, we'll put in. And we saw that principle at work, that whole idea of a gift opens the door for a giver. We saw that in action as he was like, wow, really, you guys would do that? And the other thing we said was, it felt like the Lord said to me, they're trying to decide whether they can trust you, and if they can trust you, either to just work with you, or if maybe they can just learn what you're doing and do it themselves. And some people would say, well, that's not very nice to just take all our ideas and run with them. But here's the thing. It's not my work. It's the Lord's work. If I love people, we're serving his purpose in their lives. So I can trust him with what we're doing. And so the other thing I said after I said, we're going to match whatever you do, I said, also, I just wanted to let you know that if what you're trying to do is just learn to trust us, then that's fine. You can ask us anything you want, as long as you understand that if we can earn your trust, we do need a little more breathing room in the way we work. But if instead what you're trying to do is just learn exactly what we do so you can replicate it, I just want you to know up front, that's cool with me. Because there's a lot more work to do in this world than we can do ourselves. And if you can steal every idea we've ever come up with, that would be fantastic. And it was amazing what that did in that relationship. It released that tension. And where at first he was resistant to everything, challenging everything. Now there was an open door where they still wanted to be, brushing my teeth with me. Like, here, let me hold your hand while you're doing that. It's very, like, it still was, there's a level of discomfort for us, but because we were willing to try to say, well, what can we do to align ourselves and learn about these people, and really break through this tension, we saw a whole transformation in that. We ended up doing a lot of work with them, and now they are doing a lot of it on their own. And that's fine. But it was interesting to try and employ some of these things to understand, how do you overcome what at first you can't see? And use some of these ideas about, how you can serve into a relationship. And if you're willing to operate from a love perspective, there's a lot more trust. It's interesting, the whole idea about trust. It requires exposure. And exposure, it can be exposing yourself. It also means someone else exposing themselves to you. And exposure is both a way to build intimacy as well as vulnerability. And vulnerability is vulnerable. I mean, it can be uncomfortable because when you're vulnerable, you risk getting hurt, right? And I hate getting hurt. I have a very high physical pain tolerance, which can be cumbersome if you are also accident prone, which I am. Because sometimes you can find yourself in a position where you're like, James, you're bleeding. And I'm like, oh goodness, I am. But none of us really like pain, on an emotional level especially. I mean, it's really hard to overcome some of that stuff. And so, the challenge is when we're called to leadership, the best leadership is done in relationship, and the best relationships involve a real love foundation, a love motivation. And in order to love, we have to be vulnerable to them and somehow invite them to be vulnerable to us. And that does have risk. But there's ways that we can encourage that. We can encourage that trust, and we can work with that. And and one of them that's very powerful and effective is using deference. Do you guys know what deference is? When you defer something that you're entitled to. So you could make a decision, but you're going to defer to somebody else. Or you might have a difference of opinion, but you're going to defer to their opinion. So you're taking what is your priorities and subjecting them to somebody else's. And that is such an excellent skill to use in situations of leadership because it really does volumes for building that trust. We had another story I call The Adventures of Captain Kirk. And there was this guy, his name's Kirk, and he was going to be going on one of our teams. And Kirk is an exuberant guy. He's a hardworking guy. He makes very decent income, and he's super generous, and he's very talkative and boisterous and kind of loud, and and he wants to tell everybody the same stories, and he's great to be around, but at the same time, he's like the Energizer Bunny, and sometimes it can be a real challenge to be around him because he's like that, and he has his own ideas and stuff like that, and it's all based out of this. He just loves being involved, and he was going to be going on a trip with us, and I was excited to have him, and they've been a big part of some of our projects in the past. And we're at a team meeting, and in the middle of the team meeting, he goes, "Hey, I can't stand it anymore. I'm so excited. I want to tell you about a surprise that I planned." And I'm like, okay, yeah, okay. And he goes, and he had been on a trip before, and he goes, we raised money, and we planned, and I already contacted, someone on the ground, and we're going to do a health clinic at that place that we're planning on going to that we did a water project at before. And I'm just so excited because it's going to be so awesome. Like, think for a minute what he just said. We have a whole team going to Uganda. That takes a lot of logistical planning. We've got a whole lot of stuff that's already on our agenda of what to get done as our organization. And a team member surprised us by planning a full-blown medical outreach with doctors and other things. Like that's like What? That's like showing up at somebody's house and going, surprise, I adopted you a baby. And you're like, well, babies are good. I don't hate babies, but this is so awkward, right? And it's obviously, like, we had a plan. We're leading in one direction, and he comes up with I adopted you a baby. It's going to be so wonderful, And in those moments, you have to make a decision of, first of all, what's my face going to do? Wow. And then you exchange a few glances with your assistant. Like, what in the world is going on? And then you have to do something, because here's a guy that, of his own volition, like, raised a ton of money, like, took the initiative to, and, like, so some of the things that he's employing to do this are things that are important to you. Like, wow, this guy is hook, line, and sinker in love with this community and wants to do something very practical. And this is very in line with a lot of our mission and vision. But, like, surprise, it's a medical missions trip all of a sudden, and we're completely unprepared. And you guys leave in 2 weeks, and it's like, so we had a decision. And honestly, I recognize that there's going to be plenty of other areas in what I expect to be a lifelong friendship with this man. And I said, you know what? This is my internal conversation. I said, Lord, I'm willing to defer to him and adjust things. Not completely, but I'm willing to find a way to make room for this, because while it wasn't exactly what I was hoping would happen or the timing of it, there's enough here that I can look at and say, I will make room for this, because what I want trust in this relationship. I want him to know that I have confidence in who he is. I want to affirm what it was that you put in him, Lord, that resulted in this crazy plan. Because maybe it is a little bit of a wild stallion, but I believe that there can be refinement and training in your timing. And so I'm willing to embrace a little bit of the crazy with you. And that's deference, when you're willing to say, okay, this is going to be some challenge on our side, but we believe that there's value in trusting somebody else. And that's incredibly powerful when you're trying to work with people that might have some challenges to being led. And it was very successful. It was amazing. The level of, that he could exercise some ownership. Come to find out, the big challenge in his whole life is he's so enthusiastic and willing to take initiative, but he was always plugged in with people that wouldn't tolerate that. And I understand the challenge, but it was amazing to see how much easier it was to redirect him and steer him and encourage him as a friend and a team member after that, because we were willing to give some room and trust that this was a good thing, even though it didn't feel comfortable to us. Does that clarify what deference can look like? It's uncomfortable. It usually requires some expense on your account. It also leads into another good principle. People will support what they help to create. If you're a leader, a lot of times one of the biggest challenges you'll face is, leaders are visionary. So depending on what scale you're leading on and what personality you have, I spend a tremendous amount of time living in the future, in my head, planning and seeing things that I'm excited to work to bring about. The challenge with that is, there's only, thank goodness, I'm the only one in my head. There's only that internal voice in my head. There's not a whole bunch of voices, or I'd be crazy. But when you actually go to put those plans in place and you start to move towards them, it's really important to leave space for people to create that with you, because we are called to be in community. Community is God's idea. You look at all of the different structures and the way that he leads and impacts this world. Community is saturating them all, everything from our families to where we work and how we go to church, and civil government and commerce and education. There's levels and circles of community all over the place. And as a generation, you understand that in a way that, like no other generation before you. You understand the value of doing things connected. And God does too. That's his idea. It's an expression of his. And And so it's really important that we have other people involved, because pretty much every plan that God gives us is going to have some other connection to other people, and we're going to need support from that. We're going to need other people to be active and not just be our minions, right? It's not just about the master puppeteer. It's about really doing something together as a team, as a family, as a group. And if you want people to really support what you have a vision for, you have to let them help create it, because people will support what they help to create. And that means you have to let go of some things. It doesn't mean that you let go of the whole vision, but it means that you let go of perhaps the specific color of the vehicle, or the specific path you take, or the timing perhaps, because one person moves at one speed, but 100 people move at a whole different speed. But we have to make room for that, or we're going to be alone, right? And our capacity will only be what our individual capacity is, and our impact will only be what our individual impact can be. But that can be exponentially larger, faster, deeper, more interesting, certainly more colorful, a lot noisier if we have other people involved. And so that's not always easy, because sometimes the end result is a challenge for us. I had a friend, his name was Bruno. I spent a summer living in Portugal in 1996 when I was in college. Now you're starting to realize how old I am. And Bruno was an interesting guy. He's 16 years old. He'd lived with his mother and grandmother his whole life in the city of Lisbon. And for about a week, he was out at a campground with me and a couple other 13-year-old boys, and we were going to build a playground. And these guys were really rough around the edges, like in terms of their skills. Like I had to explain to them, they knew what a hammer was. That was good. That was pretty much it. They'd never used one, and they didn't quite understand what a saw was, or a tape measure, all kinds of things like that. Like basic hand tools, these guys had no idea. And we were not just like when I say we're building a playground, we were cutting down trees in the valley, dragging them out with the Jeep, cutting the timbers, stripping them down, and building a playground. Like we're building our materials and then using our materials to build a playground. It was crazy. And doing this with guys that had no idea what to do. And Bruno was the biggest challenge out of the team, because he definitely was, he really didn't have much of a work ethic. He didn't have an overcoming attitude. He kind of, he was easy to give up and all these things. And he was a whiner. I mean, that's the reality. He was a whiner, and that was a challenge. And I was pretty impatient. And part of it was justified. I mean, like, we only had, 2 tape measures, and I'm like measuring stuff off, and he was using a hatchet to mark stuff. Well, one of the other guys was using a hatchet to mark stuff where we'd come in with the chainsaw and cut it. So I said, "Here, Bruno, why don't you do the marking?" And I was just trying to pull him close and try to build that connection with him. Maybe I won't kill him if I know a little bit more about him. So let's work together. And I said, "Okay." So I'm measuring it off, and I said, "Okay, mark it here." And he goes, whack, and he cuts the tape measure. And I'm just looking at it, and I'm just like, whew, But this was the kind of challenge we faced with him. Everything from, I'm hungry, can I take a break? Or I'm thirsty, or I need, it was a real challenge. And he didn't know how to do anything. So in the end, we had these 2 platforms, and we're building, playground stuff, And I said, the backside of this platform, this whole, thing, I want you to design something for it. And it's going to be all you. So whatever you want to dream up for the kids to play on, we'll figure out how to get you the materials, but you're going to build it. I'll help you figure stuff out, but you're going to actually do it all. And it was interesting because, I'd always wanted to build a playground, so I was having a lot of fun designing it. It had the bridge, and it had towers, and it had stuff to climb on. And I was like, this is great, And I knew, I'm like, oh, but he's going to ruin it. But I also knew that it was really important for what it would do for him. And in the end, he designed this this big wide rope ladder that was actually a lot of fun in the end. And it didn't look really cool, but it functioned really well. And it took him like 6 tries to make the thing. Like everybody else was doing all kinds of other stuff, and he spent like 4 days just making this one element. But in the end, when we had a kids camp there, and he saw the kids come down, he stood on the side, and just cried. And I'm like, are you okay, buddy? Did I finally do you in? And he just looked and he goes, they're on my thing, they're on my thing, they're on my thing. He couldn't even remember what it was called. He's like, look, and it was just this idea that he had done something, that there was a part of this that was only his. And it had a profound effect and a level of ownership. And it's funny because that was in 1996, and about 3 years ago, me and those other guys connected on Facebook, and they're all over the world. One's in Brazil, 2 of them are still in Portugal. I'm here, and we're uploading our Throwback Thursdays, Come on, yeah, aren't those awesome? We're uploading some of these pictures from building this playground together. And like hearing from him all those years later, and to be honest, his life is a real mess right now. But what he tapped into when he started talking about that was evidence that what happened in him, because he really had a place there. We gave him a place to create, and he supported that, and he really took ownership. And here's a guy that didn't want to be led. You're like, you are the laziest, whiniest, unskilled guy I've ever met. This is a challenge. I'm from a family of 10 kids. Like, we didn't have anything, so you have to figure out how to do everything yourself. Everything. The skills you learn to survive in a family that big, everything was practical. Like, all the women in my family know how to shoot guns and change oil and all that stuff. And a lot of us guys know how to sew and cook and all this stuff. And I realize I'm not saying that those are gender-specific roles, but I'm just saying we are cross-trained in a family that big. And so when we meet someone like Bruno, who's a boy and has no skills, he can't cook or shoot guns, Like, you're already on my bad side. Like, come on, what are you good for? Watching television, right? But, so I had to suppress that, as I was trying to lead these guys, and by giving him a space to create and risking what it might do to my beautiful playground, the impact was amazing and has stuck with him. And it stuck with me, because it shows me that just because I'm in a position of serving in leadership doesn't mean that it's supposed to be all about what starts out in my head. It's about making that space. Whether it's space to create in the form of people asking questions, or space to create with people getting their hands on the stuff that you're part of, whatever. But it's very important to be able to practice that. And then lastly, I just want to speak to the idea of vision. Because ultimately when we're leading people at doing anything, vision is what unites. Vision is the most powerful tool for overcoming that resistance, that objection, because if the vision is strong and clear and compelling, then those that originally didn't want to be led will oftentimes become your biggest advocates and your biggest participants. And so we have to work through that process of developing the vision and clarifying the vision and connecting it to them and building on-ramps so that different kinds of people can get on board for different kinds of reasons, but it's all about the same vision. And so become a student of what that means. If I can recommend one book to you, and I'm not a big pop culture, Christian book guy. I prefer to read things that were written by guys that died 100 years ago or more. But Andy Stanley wrote a book called Visioneering. It's really about a study about the book of Nehemiah. And, so if you don't want to read that book, at least read Nehemiah again. Because there's so much to understand about how to lay out a vision and onboard all kinds of different people onto that vision and accomplish something that is history-making, history-changing. So understand that vision is such a key piece. When we go into schools and college campuses and businesses and talk about the Ugandan Water Project, a lot of times we are going into a place where they think we're coming in to just talk about the work we do in Uganda and maybe maybe they've expressed some interest to do a fundraiser, but to them that might be the extent of, we got to do some kind of a community service thing. But we go in saying, we believe that young people today have tremendous potential and we want to unleash the beast that is these young people. And we want to see a nation change. We want to see our nation change by people realizing their potential. And so we challenge them to do crazy stuff. So they're thinking, well, maybe we'll learn about this and it'll be good and we'll raise a little bit of money. And we're going, no. We want something huge. And so we really put a lot of effort into clarifying, this is what life is like in Uganda. This is what the water crisis means there on the ground. This is how easy it is to make a difference. And this is why it's important to you, because you're created for a purpose, because the most powerful tool in this world for changing lives is self-sacrificial love. And if you can harness that into a practical solution to end hunger, to end the water crisis, to solve poverty issues, then that will change the whole world, and you'll change in the process. And when we do this all the time. When we talk to people about these kinds of things, they start to tap into that hardwiring I talked about at the beginning, that whether they are in love with Christ or not, it's in them to respond to the vision for their life. And that becomes the on-road to the specific vision for a water project. And when you can really rally people in that way and provide ways for them to plug in, whether they're interested in who they're serving, who they're connecting with, or whether it's just the idea of being part of a monumental history-making, adventure, or doing something that someone said you can't do, all these different reasons people get on board, and we see amazing stuff. We saw 6th graders at Clarence Middle School out in Clarence, New York. Anybody here from Clarence? Yeah. So 4 weeks, they raised $18,000. Yeah. South of here, Clifton Springs, 3rd graders, over $7,000. In Amherst at Sweet Home, 7th graders raised $12,000 in 19 days. We see it all over the place because they get on, they embrace a vision that's beyond themselves, and it's exciting, because a lot of times what we're willing to embrace at the beginning becomes something so much more significant, whether it's for the impact on us or the impact on somebody else, and so it's so critical to find ways to make space for people to find a place where they can contribute. An atmosphere and a culture where they can trust that you're going to defer to them. They're going to get a set of keys. It's not just a task. It's some level of real investment there that they say, my fingerprints can be part of this. And a vision that brings everything together. It's just such an amazing thing to see what happens. And we see it a lot in what we do. But the truth is, you can see that in what you do as well. It doesn't matter where you are. If you're a high school student right now, there is tremendous impact that you can make within your circle of friends by challenging them to be part of something different. Or just to intentionally change the atmosphere of how you spend your time. And maybe it's not going to be something that you do for the rest of your life with these people, but you can invite one another to, hey, let's try something as a group of friends. Maybe it's, you say, hey, I know we're a soccer team, but we can be a soccer team that changes the world in some way, that changes our school in some way, that impacts, we can take a stand for a value that we really want to stand behind instead of people thinking that we're just a bunch of guys or girls that are interested in playing this sport together and goofing around. And you can unite people around a vision because the truth is you all want it. You all want to be part of something more significant. You all want to participate in the grand adventure. You all want to risk for something that's worth taking that risk. You all want a chance to get on the field in some way or another in some arena and see if you've got what it takes, because the truth is we all suspect if I really had a shot, I do. And that's the truth, you do. So I would encourage you to believe that you can overcome some of these resistances you find in the areas where you do have influence, where you do have opportunity to lead, by learning to study people, learning about the specific people that you're working with, opening your heart to love them, waiting for the Lord to transition you from that knowledge and emotional connection to a place of authority, and then exercising some of these skills and values in the Bible about a gift opens the door to the giver, or this idea of deference and how that builds trust and engagement, and accomplish something that really will be amazing. We've got a few minutes left. I'd love to talk about this a little bit, and it can be either questions about specific things that we've done as an organization or challenges that maybe we've faced that you're wondering about. It can be specific situations you're in. It can be really about anything. Any questions whatsoever, how this ties into some of the other stuff you're talking about. Maybe I just said a bunch of stuff that really is contrary to what you just learned last session, and you want to tell me I'm wrong. That's cool. Anything at all. We have a few minutes. Yes. I like questions about Uganda. Okay. There's an egg thing they eat all the time. Oh, yeah, Rolex. Yeah. And by an egg thing, they mean they take this circular flatbread called chapati, and then they fry a couple of eggs on a griddle, and they put those on the chapati with some grilled vegetables, and they roll it up. Rolled eggs, Rolex. You can buy it on the street. The worse the neighborhood, the better the Rolex. It's street food, but it's awesome. You can get it for like 80 cents, and it's like solid meal. I love me some Rolex. I could go for some Rolex right now. Yeah. I leave in 2 weeks for Uganda, so I'm like looking forward to getting some Rolex. Yes, that would be the egg thing. Yeah. Other questions about leading when people don't want to be led, or anything at all, really? Any questions about what we do in Uganda? Anything about the story? Any of the little illustrations I used, or anything else that you might be curious about? I will swing at any pitch. If you only knew, you would ask more questions. Yes, sir. Well, I don't know about the funniest time, but I was thinking about a time this morning that I was like, do I tell this or not? There was this young guy named Thomas, and Thomas, he was a beautiful boy. Like all the girls thought he was just, not you. I didn't mean definitely not you. I just mean a different Thomas. No. This Thomas is a handsome beast. I think he's a great guy. He's come a long way from the sandbox where I first met him. But this Thomas, he's got this like big hair thing. He's got cool hair, and he just has this he looks like a male model, right? And all the girls thought he was great. And he's kind of this happy-go-lucky, a little bit of an airhead guy. And he was on one of our teams. He was part of a church group that participated in one of our teams, and I could just tell he was always he was never on time. He was never following what you were talking about. He just wasn't connecting with some of those details. And I'm like, oh, Lord, please give me grace for this boy so I do not kill him, because then I'll have to figure out how to get his body back, and that is just a logistic issue I don't want to have to tackle right now. And so I'm like, Lord, I need a unique opportunity to build trust with Thomas, because I suspect that he and I will have some conflict later in the trip. And that's not me looking for a problem. I'm a professional. I've done this. I've taken 160 people to Uganda, and I can tell you when I'm like, I'm going to stretch this one, and he's going to resist it. And so I'm like, Lord, I need a good opportunity to connect with Thomas. Well, and Thomas, one of the challenges is he will eat anything. And he ate something that did not agree with him. And so we wake up one morning, and he is puking his guts out. And his roommate comes out to me and is like, Thomas is he's puking all over the bathroom, and what should we do for him? And I was like, oh, you are hilarious. And so I went in and I cleaned up all of Thomas's vomit. And there was a few different situations later in the trip where I had to correct him, where I had to speak to him, where we had to have a couple of, hey, let's go for a little walk, buddy. But you know what? I had money in the bank with Thomas because I was hands and knees picking up the chunks. Yeah, it was nasty, but it was an excellent opportunity. It was a good example of, sometimes you need to put in those opportunities. You need to serve people so that you can build that connection, so that later when it's time to exert some leverage on one another, and it's on one another, it's a two-way street, that you've got some connection there, some trust. He's like, this guy can mop my puke. I will listen to him tell me to shut up. Well, first of all, it's very specific. So, it is not hard to encapsulate what we're trying to do. Nearly 1 billion people in this world don't have access to clean drinking water. The number one killer of children under 5 on this planet is related to contaminated water. And it's not that hard to fix the problem. So the truth is, we already spend way more money on bottled water than it would take to provide clean water for all those that are going to die this year as a result of having contaminated water. So it's pretty specific what we're trying to do. It's also very reachable. We can put a rainwater system in any village in Uganda in under 30 days. Or we can rehabilitate an existing well in a week. I mean, the solutions are reachable, and it doesn't cost that much. For under $5,000, you can do any one or a combination of our solutions, usually for about $3,500. And it's really urgent because people will die today as a result. Are you ready to sign up? Yeah. Yeah. So because it's specific, because it's compelling, and it's urgent, and it's important. It's not just important, it's also urgent. There's a moral must to the vision, and you have to tap into that. And it's very easy with something as concrete as clean water. But you have to, if you have a vision, you have to tap into who you're going to lead. You have to tap into that moral must. There's an urgency. There's a reason this shouldn't be the way it is. It should be another way, and we must do it. And if you can't define that, you're not ready to employ other people into this vision. Does that make sense? So it's very easy with something that's concrete, and oftentimes it's why we take people on teams, because they need reference material for the rest of their life. Test drive what it looks like in a concrete situation so that you can then put those same principles at work in something a little bit more ambiguous in a relational dynamic here at home. Yes? How old do you have to be to go? 1,000. No, we take a lot of people, as young as 15, 16. The bigger challenge is how prepared do you have to be to go? So the truth is, this is not volunteerism. When you go on a trip with us, when you apply for our trip, you're applying for a job. Like, you have a task, it requires some training. Like, there's specific roles. You are not just going along to see what we do, you're doing it. So, roll up your sleeves and let's pull some pipe because we got some wells to fix. Or roll out and we're going to be, photographing and documenting and interviewing and gathering data at a site where we're interviewing people. So all of you have probably, with some training, the capacity to participate. But we just say, to take it seriously, it's not an open invitation. It's a, hey, if you think you got what it takes, take a shot. We take about 10, 12 people at a time, and there's no junior team members, so anybody that comes is a full vested person on the team. $3,500 only. But seriously, that's more than either of us have in our pocket right now. But in the last 3 years, we've seen $1 million raised with our organization. I've seen amazing things happen. There's not a financial deficit in the kingdom of God. Do you understand that? There are relational deficits that sometimes get expressed in financial terms. God can give you $1 million in a million different ways in a millionth of a second. The question is, why should he? Right? So don't ever shy away from something because you don't have the money. Seriously. Sometimes you don't have the money only because you got a couple things to learn. As soon as you learn those, boom. Seriously, in October, I'm going to a conference I got invited to in Mexico by someone that has more money than anybody else I know. And I've got no business going there, except that we've gone through the school of hard knocks to learn stuff for our organization. Money is being brought to us. Not that we have lots and lots of it, but there's not a money issue in the kingdom of God. There's an alignment issue in the kingdom of God. Does that make sense? So yeah, $3,500. Ready to wrap up? All right. Well, hey, listen, I'm going to leave some of these materials here on the table. So if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about us, grab that. If you're not interested in knowing about us, don't grab that. But thanks for having me. I hope you learned a couple things you can take with you.